Okay, welcome back, everybody. It's been a little while since we've had one of these, but figured we'd get some stuff out now that the draft is over. Have a couple special guests, Eli a little later, but right now I do have, and we said we weren't going to introduce him as the former champ, but he was a former champ and he made the playoff. Anyway, Zach, how you doing?
I'm great, Jake. How are you doing,
Uh,
champ?
I am okay. Um, so I have you on here to talk mostly about the NFL draft. You always seem to be the only person that puts in a draft prediction.
hmm
Um, and as I was going down the list, by about pick 8, you had a 2 point lead on me, so I just stopped grading them. So congratulations on winning yet again.
Oh, well, thank you. It's an honor.
And next year somebody had better. Yeah. Anyways, um,
Well,
so just rough, like, give me like a Cliff Notes edition of what you thought about the draft this year.
I actually thought it went pretty according to plan, or kind of what everybody seemed to think. Of course, not a lot of trades, and I feel like the virtual, whatever you want to call it, implications of the draft had a lot to do with that. Teams seemed a little leery of trading, especially in the first round.
Yeah.
Um, but not a whole lot of fantasy impact, I would say, aside from wide receiver. I mean, obviously, three quarterbacks were drafted in the first round. I don't see any of them starting week one. Only one running back in the first round. So, um, yeah, that's kind of the overall thing I got from it.
Yeah. So then let's just start up at the top, obviously. And Eli, I know wanted to talk about him a little bit more later, but Joe Burrow, one of those three quarterbacks you mentioned, or actually, was it four quarterbacks that were
It's
drafted?
actually four. As soon
Okay.
as I said that, it was four. Jordan Love went to Green Bay, and kind of forgot about that pick, seeing it was arguably the worst draft pick of all time.
Do you want to elaborate on that one?
I feel like you got. It's not so much that I understand draft a backup to your quarterback, who is what's Rogers now, 36,
Mm-hmm.
37, somewhere around there. I get that you need a backup for him, but to trade up, first of all, you traded up for the guy. You're wasting resources. They need receivers. He needs help. And you go and draft his backup, waste of a pick. And a guy who is super raw at that. So I thought that was laughable. I thought the Seahawks were, again, going to have the worst pick in the first round, which I think they did up until then. So, yeah. Oh, no, he was picked right before the Seahawks. So they didn't even have a chance. Yeah, it was mind boggling. But as a Packers hater, I don't care.
Okay. So you mentioned this was a wide receiver heavy draft too. Was there anybody in that first round? I know when you and I were texting about it when it happened, you mentioned you liked Jerry Judy with the Broncos. I mean, there was Henry Ruggs that went before him at wide receiver. What I mean, C.D. Lamb. What about some of these other guys? Rager went to Eagles. There's the word I was looking for. Or another one that I actually wanted to ask about specifically, Justin Jefferson. Is he the Diggs heir now that he's out of Minnesota? Or I mean, how many of these wide receivers from the first round do you think are actually going to start and have fantasy implications right off the bat?
I loved the Jefferson pick. I think he's going to be great in Minnesota, and like you said, especially with Diggs out of town now, I can't say he'll step right in, but he will eventually, be the probably the next number one, because Thielen, he's still there, but he's kind of getting up there in age. I mean, he's almost 30, and in football years, that's basically like being 60. So, um, but that's one thing. That's why I say there's not a whole lot of fantasy implications in this, because uh, wide receivers, they usually take a while. It's pretty rare that they come out hot out of the gate. So they're all really, I mean, every receiver that was drafted in the first round is really talented and has a shot to be the number one on their team, but it usually comes with time.
Mm-hmm.
Or a lot of times, like you'll see last year, when Marquise Brown was drafted. I think he was the only receiver drafted in the first round last year. Um, he came out hot. Like he started off really hot and then just was ice cold throughout basically the rest of the season. You might get a game here and there where he blows up, but I think long term though, I love the outlook of Jerry Jeudy and CD Lamb and Justin Jefferson in particular.
Yeah. All right. And then now obviously there was just one running back in the first round.
Yeah.
And we'll talk about him here in a little bit because I feel like he'll have more. I don't know. He's one of those that could probably get picked up right off the bat and just be ready to go. Not necessarily a red shirt, but let's talk quarterbacks a second. I know. You said you don't like the Jordan Love pick. What about like Tua to Miami or Herbert to L.A. Chargers? Thank you. I mean, any of these other ones really strike your fancy, or they just, development or?
Yeah, I actually really like Tua. He was my favorite quarterback in the draft. I know a lot of people are kind of sour on Alabama quarterbacks, but obviously I don't really care for his landing spot because Miami is just god awful.
Mm-hmm.
But they do have the benefit of having a lot of picks. They did in this draft, and then next draft they'll have a few stockpiled too. So maybe they can build around him. I don't think he's going to start this year. If he does, it'll be, midway through the year if he's, healthy enough with his, dislocated or fractured hip, whatever it was.
Yeah.
But I really like him as a player. I don't know. I'm very unsure about his surrounding cast, mainly the offensive line. He has some decent offensive weapons, mm-hmm. Devontae Parker, and they drafted another receiver in one of the later rounds. I can't remember, but yeah, I do like Tua. I'm not a huge fan of Justin Herbert. He's probably got the best cast around him out of all the quarterbacks, but I'm just not sold on him. I didn't really like his college tape. He seemed really inconsistent, but he went number 6 overall. So somebody knows something that I don't, obviously.
Yeah, or they got rid of their veteran quarterback and they just needed to fill that, and they weren't going to go the Love route or any of those other quarterbacks. But
exactly. And then when I said earlier that I don't expect any of them to start day one, I completely excluded Joe Burrow just because, it seems like he's been the number 1 pick in this draft for the last 8 months. Mm-hmm. So, I already just had him as the starting quarterback for the Bengals. Basically I thought he played last year. So he'll be the starter, and it's kind of intriguing. Again, he's not a guy that I'm sold on, but the Bengals offense does look a little intriguing.
I was going to ask about, obviously if he does start, they have Higgins they got in the second round, AJ Green, and who's their other wide receiver?
I'm drawing a blank on his name.
Tyler Boyd.
Tyler Boyd. Yeah.
How much of these are? Is there going to be? Anything coming out of Cincinnati? You think, or?
If Joe Burrow can reproduce what he did in college, they'll have a very interesting offense. Because Mixon can catch the ball out of the backfield. He can be Joe Burrow's Clyde Edwards, or is it Edwards-Helaire? Yeah, Edwards-Helaire. Whatever.
Yeah.
Damn French. But yeah, so they do have a lot of weapons. Mixon coming out of the backfield can catch balls. Their head coach, Zach Taylor, was supposed to be the next offensive guru because he coached with, Sean McVay. Mm-hmm. So if the hype is true about this guy, Zach Taylor and Joe Burrow, they might be able to put something together. I don't think Cincinnati will be a good team, but their offense could kind of get rolling, and maybe they'll be a team to look out for in the future, and be a good fantasy. Because they're going to be behind a lot too.
Sure.
So you get a lot of that garbage time stats, or just trying to play catch up stats with the offensive players that they have. So it'll be intriguing to keep an eye on.
Yeah, a lot of garbage time.
Yeah.
So you mentioned him briefly, and I obviously want to talk about him, and we'll get to some of these dynasty aspects, especially with our league. But talk to me about Clyde Edwards-Helaire. Like the one running back in the first round, obviously it wasn't a great year for running backs, but I feel like I mean, next to him, there were a couple that, again, we'll get to in a second, but um, I don't know about you, but I like the fit in Kansas City. I like how that's going, especially with, obviously that kind of an offense. I feel like that should be just a quick, I mean, even if he's the relief guy for a little bit, getting used to that offense with Mahomes and everything like that. But what do you think about that? Him?
I wasn't a huge fan of him in general. I know I'm pretty negative this podcast. I'm not a huge fan of anybody apparently, but I'm gonna trust Andy Reid. If he's going to draft a running back in the first round, he obviously has an idea of how he wants to use him, and he obviously has faith in him. So, yeah, I will definitely trust what Andy Reid thinks about this running back. But I mean, personally, I maybe had him in my top 5 running backs in the draft,
Yeah.
but he landed in the perfect spot because Kansas City loves their running backs, and I think he proved that he can catch passes in LSU. So, what better resource for Patrick Mahomes to have, for, safety valve, just dump it off to a guy who's a proven pass catcher in college. So, yeah, he's definitely going to be, right up there as one of the first guys taken in the dynasty draft.
Sure. So now, I mean, just as we kind of wrap up, because I feel like looking at all the other first rounders, there are some that we could talk about, but I mean, it was really wide receiver heavy. So I feel like we should jump over to our league and what kind of implications these have. But is there any other, I mean, what team do you think did the best, did the worst? I know we talked about it a little bit, but looking into the NFL season, immediate impact, do you think the Chiefs are going to be repeat Super Bowl title, or what do you think?
I don't see why not. I mean, I'm not going to say they're going to repeat as Super Bowl champs. They're definitely going to be in the hunt the whole year. But as far as the draft goes and just how good the team is to begin with, the Ravens crushed it, and they just get better. They see teams before them in the draft make horrible picks, have good players slide down to them, and they take them. Like, the first round they got a linebacker. We don't need to go into that fantasy, whatever. But the second round they ended up picking J.K. Dobbins at running back, and I love that guy. I think he's going to be the heir apparent to Mark Ingram, and he got passed over by way too many teams, and then Baltimore just let him fall right into their lap and said, "Oh yeah, we're a running team. We'll take that super talented running back." Like, so yeah, I think the Ravens are going to be my team to look out for this year. I mean, it's not breaking any new ground saying the Ravens are a Super Bowl contender, but yeah, I think they're the best team in the league going into the season.
All right. And obviously we already talked about Green Bay a little bit. Is there any other teams that, and I always say it, and I know I said it last podcast, and there are teams that obviously some that you steer clear of from a fantasy aspect based on the draft. Still, I generally don't go Raiders, even though, I mean, they did address some of their needs. The other one looks like, I mean, the Redskins probably not going to go anything that direction, but is there anybody else that really stood out and you're like, wow, I don't know how these paid professionals are paid professionals and they should hire some of us, amateurs?
Honestly, I mean, they've proven to be a very good franchise, drafting and otherwise, but the Philadelphia Eagles, I could not figure out what they were doing in this draft. Like, they waited. They had the opportunity to trade up. They saw the run on wide receivers. They obviously wanted a wide receiver, and they just stood pat and ended up taking Jalen Reagor. And, who am I to say he's no better than this guy or that guy? But Justin Jefferson was right there, too. And I think he proved himself at LSU. He was the best receiver on the best team in college football.
Mm-hmm.
And I think overall, a lot of scouts and draft analysts or whatever had him much higher. So I wasn't crazy about that. And then, of course, the second round, they took another backup quarterback who I feel like they're going to incorporate into like the Taysom Hill type role, running back, wide receiver, quarterback in Jalen Hurts.
Mm-hmm.
I still wasn't crazy about that. I get you need an insurance policy because Carson Wentz has proven that he can't stay healthy for a full year,
Yeah.
but that was just an odd pick for a team that is right there, and you can fill holes on your team to put yourself right back into Super Bowl contention. I feel like backup quarterback slash gadget player is just not the route to go when you're that close.
Sure. That makes sense. Now we are going to actually switch over to a little bit more of our how much impact some of these. And now, while we did talk mostly about the first round, and Eli will talk a little bit about some of the later prospects, let's talk specifically about how much some of these are going to affect, especially our keepers, and some of those decisions. Because obviously, when we're looking at most of our teams, you know approximately the six that any team is going to walk away with. But are there any real contenders in this that will actually shake it up a little bit for who you I would assume would be a keeper? Say, for example, I mean, especially with um, like the fifth year options being declined, Leonard Fournette being one that comes to mind right off the bat. Obviously, Jacksonville has seemed like they're done with him. Is that something Arthur should start to steer clear of, or what kind of fantasy implications do you see?
I mean, in that specific case with Leonard Fournette, I would still keep him because he's about the only thing that the Jaguars have on offense aside from DJ Chark. Um, and then I don't know if you want to throw in Gardner Minshew. I'm not I'm not willing to put any money on that, but I think with Leonard Fournette, it's like I said, that specific case. I still think you have to keep him. I don't see anybody in this draft who is capable of replacing his production right
Mm-hmm.
off the bat, um, unless you think someone like Clyde Edwards-Helaire can do that. I'm not sold on that yet, but and that's the thing. Like this draft, if you really want to just, I think this draft is more of a weighted out because it was so receiver heavy.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't think there's anybody necessarily, if you're on the fence about keeping or not and hoping you're going to pick up some stud rookie, I don't think there's any rookie in this class that's worth having you drop someone that you're on the fence about keeping or not. I say if you have your keepers in mind,
Mm-hmm.
keep them. And I don't have a lot of faith in rookie receivers right out the gate.
Sure. Um, Now, how much with some of these picks? Obviously, I know wide receiver heavy. Does it boost the fantasy impact of, say, like a Kirk Cousins with the pickup of their wide receiver, or Denver with? I mean, with some of these that can, like you said, wide receiver is one that might take a year or two. Tight end is another one that could take a couple years. Um, I mean, does it boost the quarterbacks in any way with some of these wide receivers?
Um, yeah, I think you brought him up, Drew Lock in Denver.
Mm-hmm.
I think he's a really interesting guy to look at. I'm not sure, especially with the depth of our rosters in our league, if you really need to, if he needs to be picked up. But he's someone that I would look at definitely in later rounds if you have, a quarterback that you're not super sold on, or if you have a quarterback, say like Carson Wentz, who is pretty injury prone.
Mm-hmm.
Drew Lock, I think, is very interesting just because he finished the season strong, and they only got better on offense with their draft. They drafted multiple receivers, and they got a tight end.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not going to attempt to pronounce his last name, but it's Albert Okwabunum or something like that.
Something like that. I couldn't tell you.
Anyway, it was his college tight end, and it was his favorite receiver in college. So they have that instant chemistry. Now they already have a great tight end, or I shouldn't say great. They have a good tight end in Noah Fant too.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that Drew Lock, they surrounded him with a lot of receiving options, and on top of that, they picked up Melvin Gordon in free agency.
Mhm.
I think Denver's offense is actually going to be pretty potent if they can hang in there on defense. I know the defense is aging a little bit, so that's kind of, you know, that's
Yeah.
kind of a concern. But again, even if they're a bad team with a good offense and an average defense, they
Hmm.
might be playing catch up a little more, like we were talking about with the Bengals. So a lot of maybe garbage time or just catch up points. I really like Drew Lock, especially because of what Denver did in the draft.
Okay. What about some of these other? I'm looking at just down this list of just rookie prospects for dynasty leagues, and obviously Edwards-Helaire is a top one. Jerry Jeudy, C.D. Lamb, those are all top. Let's talk running back though. With Edwards-Helaire being the only one in the first round, like what about some of these others? Jonathan Taylor in Indianapolis, he's probably going to sit behind Marlon Mack a little bit, or DeAndre Swift in Detroit, or Cam Akers in L.A. I mean, are any of these that have the potential to kind of bust out and be fantasy relevant this year, or like you keep saying, just sit around and wait on most of them?
I think all of them do. I think
Yeah.
they all have potential to do it. And then again, J.K. Dobbins in Baltimore, they're going to run the ball. That's their game.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and Mark Ingram is a 31 or 30-year-old running back. He'll be 31 in December or something like that. And as we know in running back years, that's time to take him out behind the shed and shoot him between the eyes, right? Um,
Yeah.
that was dark and morbid. Sorry,
It's
but
okay.
yeah. um, but yeah, I really like his potential, and with guys like DeAndre Swift, and
Mm-hmm.
Jonathan Taylor, who was my favorite running back in this draft.
Yeah.
Um, they're playing behind two running backs who also, again, have proven themselves to not be the most healthy.
Yeah.
Marlon Mack dealt with, I think, ankle injuries last year. And then Kerryon Johnson in Detroit was, I forget what his was, but his season ended pretty quickly.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and I think they're going to be splitting time no matter what. My only concern with Jonathan Taylor is he's so much like Marlon Mack, where normally when you have that two-headed monster at running back, you have the one guy who's between the tackles and then the other guy who's the pass catcher. Well, these guys are both bruisers. They're both between the tackles guys.
Mm-hmm.
Although Jonathan Taylor did show in his last year in college that he can catch some passes after having caught zero in his first two college years. But he did catch 26 passes, something like that, for like 300 yards. So he can do a little bit of that. But he was my favorite running back in this draft. I think he's super talented. My biggest issue with him, though, is he had over 900 carries in 3 years in college.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of tread on those tires. So maybe he has, a 6, 7 year career and that's about it. But for fantasy, I mean, I have the feeling you're going to see him pull out a good 3 or 4 like top notch fantasy years. I don't know if this will be the year, but he's definitely worth, holding on to.
Yeah. All right. Then what about Cam Akers with the Rams? Is he going to be? I mean, is he heir apparent now that Gurley's out of the picture? Is he going to be able to step in and just kind of be the guy, or what happens there?
I think he is. His thing with when he played at Florida State, they had a horrible offensive line and they had no quarterback play.
Mm-hmm.
So he kind of flew under the radar. He's a super talented running back. Um, and I think he's leaps and bounds ahead of Darrell Henderson as far as skill
Mm-hmm.
at running back. So I'm sure they'll split time. I think Malcolm Brown, is that the other guy? I think he's
Yeah.
still there. So it might be that kind of three-headed monster at first, but Cam Akers is a really talented guy who kind of flew under the radar. The only problem is the Rams also have a pretty horrible offensive line at this point too. So it with a lot of these players in this draft, it might not be this year, but
Mm-hmm.
next year, year after, they'll be the guys that you're talking about being drafted as low RB1, high RB2, something like that.
Yeah. And what about the? I mean, since we're with LA, what about their wide receiver that they got? Was it Van Jefferson? I mean, his comparisons were uh, Cooper Cup and who's the other wide receiver in LA?
Robert Woods.
Woods. That's the one. Thank you.
Was it Woods?
Yeah. Van Jefferson, he was compared to kind of a mix between Cooper Cup and Robert Woods. Um, I mean, obviously, again, we keep going back to the fact that, I mean, rookies, wide receivers take a little bit to jump into it. I mean, is there
Mm-hmm.
anything there?
I mean, if those comparisons pan out, I mean, that's a hell of a receiver, and he's obviously with the right team. Um,
Yeah.
yeah, I mean, I liked him too. He was one of those guys who, at the beginning of last year was in that conversation of being a first round pick.
Mm-hmm.
Um, dealt with some shoddy quarterback play, so obviously the stats weren't there, and you're not seeing him on the highlights every week. So he's definitely talented. I still think being buried on that depth chart behind Cooper Cup and Robert Woods.
Mm-hmm.
And I know they want to get Josh Reynolds, I think is the other guy. I know they want to get him more involved. And then they found something with Tyler Higbee at tight end last year too. So he's got a lot of work to do to, crack into the lineup. But
Mm-hmm.
again, like we've been saying, it's going to be the mantra for this whole thing. Just maybe in a year or two, like you'll definitely start seeing his name pop up a little more.
Yeah, a lot of kind of those. I mean, not many of us have really utilized that red shirt as much as we should, and I know Eli will talk about it a little later. That's one of the things he wanted to go over. But I mean, when you get your rookies and you're looking at them, there are some that you hope to perform now, and other ones you're just kind of, well, let's wait and see what happens.
Yeah.
And I mean, especially with some of the depth with wide receiver, there is going to be a lot of that. Just kind of wait and see what happens with some of these guys. But
yeah,
there are guys like N'Keal Harry from this last year on Chubbawamba that he was the red shirt, never activated. Of the red shirts, and I don't recall how many of them were actually activated this last year. Are any of them going to be worth keeping? Noah Fant was another that Eli had. I think DK Metcalf. Paris Campbell was a wide receiver for Boomer Busters. Debo Samuel. I know San Francisco picked up another wide receiver.
Well, I mean, some of those I know were activated. You had Samuel, correct?
Yeah, Debo Samuel I did. And I got activated right at the end of the year.
I mean, yeah, he's definitely someone that I would consider keeping. I think he's got a spot there. I'm trying to go through and see if, I don't think Fant was activated by Eli, was he?
No, I'm not showing that.
Yeah, that's a tricky one only because he already has Zach Ertz.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm looking at it through my lenses, obviously. I'm not super big on keeping two tight ends or even two quarterbacks for that matter. Even though I did all year last year, so I kind of broke that. But yeah, I mean, but Fant, if he were maybe on any other roster who didn't have a great tight end to in front of him, definitely, I think he's going to be one of those. He's going to be this year's Darren Waller or who was the other tight end that kind of came out of nowhere. But yeah, I think Darren Fant or Darren Jesus Christ, Darren Fant, my new favorite player. No, nice. Noah Fant. He's going to be. I wouldn't be surprised to see him be like a top 10 tight end this year. But I think, unfortunately, he might just be on the wrong team. But considering Eli's lack of talent on his roster, maybe it is worth a keep. I had to get my Eli shot in. I'm sorry.
That's all right. I mean, you could keep going. Just kind of beat that dead horse.
We'll keep it light. We'll keep it light.
Okay. So I got to ask, have you decided your six keepers?
Yeah, I think so. And I think the only one that I was ever really on the fence about kind of made that decision for me based on where he signed. So I think my six keepers are pretty set in stone now.
I'm trying to go over them and see which ones, because you're going to let Kyler Murray go, obviously.
Yeah, I don't want to, but I mean, when you have probably the number one quarterback, like him, Lamar Jackson or Mahomes, whoever
Hmm.
you 1 and 2, 1A, 1B.
Sure.
Kind of hard to justify keeping Kyler Murray just to keep him on your bench.
Yeah. Your team is pretty stacked. I mean, for your six, I mean Jackson, Thomas, Beckham. I assume you keep Waller, Melvin Gordon, maybe. Like you're pretty well set.
Yeah, yeah, I'm happy with it, but it's also like I hate to see some of the people go, and yeah, I probably shouldn't broadcast this, but I'm going to try and throw out some trades, or like, hey, you want this guy? Because I already got my six. Want to throw a draft pick my way, and I know what's going to happen. Someone's going to try and trade rate me. I'm going to turn it down and get called stingy for it. And yeah,
Well,
so
throw it out there. What kind of trades are you looking to shop around?
to be honest, I haven't really thought about it too much. It's just been kind of like I've had a hard time getting back into sports and stuff like that right now. So this might be the jumping off point for me because I'm getting reinvigorated now. So, but yeah, I'll just throw it out there. Melvin Gordon's on the block if anybody wants him.
Okay. I
And then
would not.
maybe David Montgomery, my first round pick from last year. We'll see.
Yeah.
I don't think anybody really wants him, but
Yeah. Well, and now obviously going into, I mean, the off season, we're looking at keepers here in the next, I think July, whenever the date was, I'll include it in the email here. But I mean, which of these teams do you think is poised for a good run this next season for us? I know it's
in our league.
yeah, I know it's tough to tell with obviously with there's so much that can happen between now and even the start of the season. But I mean, what do you like most about some of these teams, some of these rosters, and going forward? What do you like?
Um, I'm trying to scroll through and find because I know there was a team who I thought just did so poorly when they really shouldn't have, and I'm trying to figure out if I can remember who it was. But um, one team that I do like though is the Flying Dutchman. They kind of got burned with some injuries last year. Um, some may say some questionable trades, but they didn't get a lot out of players that they should have. Tyreek Hill
Mm-hmm.
injuries cost him a few weeks. Um, Julio Jones, I mean, he had another stellar year, but I think at the end of the year he kind of wore down. Juju Smith-Schuster without consistent quarterback play.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I don't think he really got anything out of him after Dutchman made that trade for him, in which he gave up Devontae Adams. Uh,
Yeah.
it was kind of he had to do it. So I graded that trade poorly for him, but I mean, he still got a solid wide receiver in return, so you can't complain. And then Kenyon Drake, he's going to be the clear cut number one in Arizona right now. So that's, you get a full season of that. That would be nice.
Yeah.
Um, Austin Hooper, if he can stay healthy, I know he got hurt at the end of the year. Uh, Dutchman should make a strong comeback this year. I think they need a quarterback with a solid quarterback, uh, leading the way.
Yeah.
Carson Wentz again. You can't have too much faith in him because of his injury history, but DK Metcalf is on there. But yeah, the Dutchmen look good. I wouldn't be surprised to see them higher up in the standings than they were last year.
Yeah. Well, and the other one that I mean, I know we've talked about him a lot this year, but the Sea Chicken Chokers, a point out of the playoffs, a point for the toilet bowl, really close year for him. But I like his roster. I mean, Russell Wilson, DJ Moore. I don't know if he's going to keep Julian Edelman. Obviously, Ingram's getting a little older, but he's still got Stephon Diggs. He's got Robert Woods, Aaron Jones. I guess he does have Tom Brady, and I mean, maybe you can speak to that one. Is Tom Brady going to be worth a fantasy look at all now that he's 95 and, you know,
Yeah, I honestly this year I would be way more willing to draft Tom Brady this year than I was last year. That Tampa Bay offense is and working under Bruce Arians, it's going to be dangerous. It's not like Brady needs to throw the ball, 60 yards in the air every play, but I mean, he can still dink and dunk and let the receivers do the work. Big body guys like Mike Evans
Yeah.
and, guys who excel in the slot and on the outside like Chris Godwin. Scott Gronk back. I mean, I know Gronk is kind of a shell of himself at this point, but
But also
they got
95.
chemistry.
Yeah.
Also, what? Sorry.
Also 95, but
Yes, yeah, exactly. In football years, for sure. I'm pretty sure Gronk is still younger than me,
I
but
don't know. I mean, I don't know. With as much wear and tear as he's gone through, I'm pretty sure, like, even if he is younger than you, he's like, I don't know. His dog years like football years, it's probably the same thing, right?
yeah, for sure. There's definitely some sort of correlation there. He's pretty beat up, but I mean, remember he had arguably his worst year, the year that New England last won a Super Bowl against the Rams.
Mm-hmm.
But he came up with probably the most clutch play in that Super Bowl. So if he can keep that going, I mean, Brady will always have that confidence to throw it to him. So
Yeah.
I'm speaking more in regards to Brady's fantasy relevance at this point. Having Gronk is just a huge thing for him.
Yeah.
And on top of that, he's an excellent blocker. So maybe they want to run some sort of like three wide, one tight end, but keep the tight end to block, like extra protection for Brady.
Sure. Well, then I'm actually going to jump over to the second place finisher from this last season. Boomer Busters came in runner up, and I think they're probably one of the best poised teams just based on where they are currently. Mahomes at quarterback, Adams, Brown, Emmanuel Sanders if he does anything over in New Orleans, but he's also got his tight end with Mark Andrews kind of set up already. The only thing I think he really needs to worry about um, is running back, and maybe you can speak to that one more. He's got Marlon Mack, Sony Michel, and Raheem Mostert bringing up that running back core for him.
Yeah, running back is going to be something that he needs to address, probably in the draft. And if he can, maybe try and swing a trade before the draft, maybe give up a draft pick. I'll just throw it out there again. Melvin Gordon's available. If you want to throw me a first or a second, we can talk. But um, I still like Marlon Mack. I'm sure he's going to keep him. He does have, as we talked about earlier, Jonathan Taylor, a young running back, kind of nipping at his heels. But if Mack can stay healthy, Indy's got that incredible offensive line, so I have no issues with him. Sony Michel is a big question mark. Don't know. I mean, I could see it going one of two ways. Either they're going to rely on him big time in New England because of the uncertainty at quarterback, or they're just going to be so bad that nobody's going to be productive on offense for that team. So it's a huge risk with him.
Yeah. Well, I mean, with that question mark at quarterback, Sony Michel being the running back, you don't think New England's going to be that run and defense first sort of thing? Or
I mean, they're going to have to, I think, that they're going to have to at least try it out unless Bill Belichick knows something about Jared Stidham that nobody in the world does.
Sure.
Like, well, I mean, obviously he struck gold with Tom Brady that way. Nobody expected Brady to be what he is. So,
yeah.
But I think but you can only do that to a certain point. Especially in today's NFL, there are only a few teams that really succeed with just that ground and pound and then rely on defense.
Yeah.
And I don't know if Michel can hold up. I mean, I don't think his body can hold up. He's been relatively injury prone too. So,
no. Well, and do you take the gamble with? I mean, hoping that he is the running back that they rely on, or I mean, it's the same boat for Deshaun with Raheem Mostert in San Francisco. I mean, who's the running back over there? I mean, how can you anticipate that?
Yeah, that San Francisco backfield is something that I would like to avoid when it comes to drafting, and I guess in this case keeping keepers.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, Mostert is intriguing because it could be him one week, but then it could be Tevin Coleman the next week. I just think with our roster size and the amount of people that we're allowed to keep, I wouldn't think it's worth it. And I mean, skimming over his roster, I could probably pretty clearly pick out his 6 keepers at this point.
Yeah.
and I only see one running back on there that I think is a surefire keeper, and I think it's Marlon Mack, just based on he is the clear-cut starter at this point
Yeah.
on a team with a great offensive line, and that they do want to run the ball, especially now with Phillip Rivers there. We
Hmm.
all seen what his arm looks like now, so I think that run game is going to be pretty key for that team.
Sure. All right, then let's compare that now to, I mean, the luckiest team in the universe, Solania. He does have a choice with whether he's going to keep DeAndre Hopkins or Leonard Fournette, but I mean he's set too when it comes to Cousins is I mean at least reliable when it comes to quarterback. Is Philip Lindsay going to have some kind of a big drop now that I mean is he competing for that starting running back position?
Mm, yeah, that's a tricky one because I mean, just looking at it, my initial instinct is, well, you got to keep DeAndre Hopkins.
Mm-hmm.
He's arguably the best wide receiver in the game. I mean, I would listen to that argument, but I'm looking through his running backs, and yeah, like you said, there's a question mark with Lindsey. I mean, Philip Lindsay was already split in the backfield with Royce Freeman,
Mm-hmm.
and now you're going to add in Melvin Gordon, who I have to imagine, if it's still going to be a split backfield, it's going to be like 70-30, you know? I mean, maybe. If I was running the team, it would be. I think Melvin Gordon, if Melvin Gordon is an incredible running back, and then Chris Carson,
Yeah,
I love my Seahawks, but a guy cannot stay healthy. He'll
it's
give
true.
you a good 8 to 10 games, but you don't count on him being there at the end of the year.
Yeah,
And then James White, like we were talking about earlier with the Patriots uh, offensive situation, maybe he's due for a even bigger role, being that safety valve for a young, uncertain quarterback, just dumping off passes out of the backfield to him.
sure. So you said you liked what the Flying Dutchman could potentially do. Is there anybody from the final six finishers from this last season that you see taking a big drop or anything like that?
Mm. Ooh, that's a tough one. Um, yeah, I might have to stick with Selenia on that one.
Yeah,
I think there's a lot of uncertainty, or even Mickey Mania. I think there's just a lot of uncertainty. It's not for lack of talent, that's for sure, but it's sort of age and the surrounding pieces. With Mickey Mania, Keenan Allen and Austin Eckler were great last year. They were great for fantasy purposes, but now they're going to be playing with either Tyrod Taylor or a rookie quarterback.
yeah,
I don't know what sort of production you're going to get with that, with either one of those guys under center. So it's like, you can't really drop Keenan Allen, could you? Like,
I don't know. I mean, you always were a bigger fan of him than I have ever been, but now you're absolutely right. I mean, it's tough.
here's one thing I will say. I love Nick Chubb this year, and
Hmm.
I love the Browns this year because of what they did in free agency and the draft.
Yeah,
They established their offensive line. They picked up Jack Conklin from Tennessee, and then they drafted another tackle. They are trying to protect Baker Mayfield because they saw last year the guy had no time to throw the ball. And he, I guess one of his biggest flaws is under pressure. Maybe he's just not the greatest. But I mean, who is when they have less than 2 seconds to get rid of the ball? He was just getting crushed.
yeah,
And maybe it's because I'm really hoping for Odell Beckham Jr. to have a great year, which I am. Um, but I think the Browns offense is going to look amazing this year. It's going to look like what everybody thought it was going to look like last year, and it's because they fortified that offensive line. So Nick Chubb,
sure.
I mean, I wouldn't be surprised to see him be the number one running back this year, kind of like Derrick Henry coming out of nowhere last year was. So yeah, I mean, Mickey Mania, that's going to be their centerpiece right there. But like I said, question marks with Keenan Allen, Austin Eckler, um, Todd Gurley. I mean, he's kind of the clear cut number one in Atlanta. But again,
Hmm.
how long's that knee going to hold up? Just, and I'm always leery of players who switch teams.
Yeah.
So running back, not so much. I mean, just get the ball, run. It shouldn't be that hard. Uh, but we saw with Le'Veon Bell, like he couldn't get it done with the Jets, and that's another one of her running backs. So
Yeah, but is that one? I mean, who was the quarterback last year?
for the Jets,
Yeah, it was Darnold. Yeah.
well, it was for a little bit. Remember, he had mono, so he
Oh, yeah.
missed a few weeks, and they were down to like guys off the street playing quarterback for him. So yeah, that definitely sucked. But also their coach Adam Gase, I've never been a fan of him,
Mm-hmm.
and for some reason he hates talented players. So he does. I don't think he knows how to utilize Le'Veon Bell, and it's probably going to show again this year. So yeah, I think Mickey Mania might be due for a little regression.
Well, as we do look to wrap this one up, is there anything else you want to add or address? Or I know obviously you already called out a bloody puddle for just being atrocious, but anything else you want to throw on there?
Yeah, nothing really to add. I think we got most of it out.
Yeah.
Like I said, I'm open for trades. So anybody come at me. Um,
Well, I think there's some good stuff in there, and obviously Eli's going to talk about absolutely nothing here in a little bit, but I
I
mean,
look forward to that.
yeah. All right. Well, sir, good talking with you here, and hopefully have you on again once keepers and everything have been declared, or right around that point, and into the season.
Yeah, for sure.
All right. Thank you, sir.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Okay, here we are with our second guest, formerly known as the Flying Graysons. You might change your name back. I don't know. A Dead Horse, Bloody Puddle, whatever you want to go by. I got Eli here. How you doing?
Oh, I'm doing all right. I do need a new team name. I am taking suggestions. There will be a whole lottery. It's going to be very intensive. I'll probably make the whole thing a series of what's that
Gifts?
site called that people make fucking videos on? Is it Vine? I don't know. Fuck you guys. I do it on Snapchat. Much better. Whatever.
So, in other words, if you have Eli on Snapchat, please don't answer them in the next couple weeks. All right. Well, we are going to be talking mostly about some of the late round flyers when it comes to the draft. With Zach, we were talking first round, and we talked kind of the dynasty keeper outlook, how some of the players affect our decisions for our keepers and what we should really be thinking and looking about. With you, though, I wanted to kind of look into and specifically talk about more some of the red shirt aspects. Because at least when I'm looking at a red shirt, obviously there are guys like Tanner that'll go tight end for whatever reason, but it always takes 3 to 4 years for the tight end to really kick in. The other side of that is you do have quarterbacks that Joe Burrow, he's probably going to be starting immediately because of Andy Dalton just getting cut and signing with Dallas. You mentioned you wanted to talk about him a little bit, and we'll get to that in a second. Running backs, they have some that'll start immediately, others that'll wait in the depth chart, and then wide receivers that can sometimes take a year or two. When you're looking at red shirts, what do you generally look for? What are you looking at, and what do you think most teams in the league generally look at when they're picking their red shirt?
For me, I always like to pick a red shirt that I don't want anyone else to have on their roster, that I personally would like at some point to perform, or who I think is going to be a good option when I would otherwise want to head to the waiver wire. But instead, I can just activate my red shirt. That's what I personally look for. If you're looking to draft and red shirt somebody like Joe Burrow, fine, okay. If you're going to draft somebody like Joe Burrow, I think you're specifically looking for somebody who's going to progress in the next 2 years. There's nothing this year that he's going to do to replace Andy Dalton as a fantasy quarterback. And frankly, who had Andy Dalton last year? He's not a bad quarterback. It's a bad team. He has a bad O-line. He doesn't have receivers who care. It's not a good situation for a rookie quarterback, in my opinion. But as I always say with anything when I give fantasy opinion, I constantly lose. Don't listen to me.
Okay.
More interesting to me personally is Tua. He's not going to start this year. They're throwing Joe Burrow into a system where he's going to get hit constantly. He's going to turn into David Carr. Joe Burrow is going to be the next David Carr. You can probably cut this out because that's just asinine speculation at this point. But I don't trust the Bengals O-line.
Okay.
And it's not that David Carr was a bad quarterback. It's not that Joe Burrow was a bad quarterback. It's that I don't think that they have the team to support starting a rookie right away. Tua, on the other hand, is going to get to sit behind Ryan Fitzpatrick for the rest of the year.
Okay.
I don't know about the rest of you, but I like Ryan Fitzpatrick. I wish that he had had a better go of things in his career. Tua, coming off the injury, is not going to be a right-away starter. He might take over your...
All right. You like Ryan Fitzpatrick. You like Tua kind of starting behind him. Obviously, having a veteran quarterback, even though he is a journeyman, I'll mention that one for Fitzpatrick. But having him kind of there to guide him in a way is more beneficial long run than somebody like Joe Burrow getting started right in it.
That's exactly what I'm saying. I think it's always better to have a mentor when you're starting with a rookie quarterback. The jump from college to professional is difficult for a lot of them. And as we look slightly later in the first round, we've got some, in my opinion, interesting people such as, yes, Henry Ruggs III, Raiders fan, a little bit biased. Do you redshirt somebody like Henry Ruggs III? Do you completely avoid him because you think Derek Carr's getting cut? The one thing that Derek Carr has lacked in his career is a fast, deep threat.
And you think Henry Ruggs is going to take on that mantle?
I think he very much could. But if you're in the crowd that thinks
Derek is just a terrible quarterback, then it doesn't really matter for him, right?
Right. If you take that opinion, or if you think that he is being replaced this season by
Marcus
Mariota,
yep.
Then great. Definitely don't take Henry Ruggs because Mariota just likes to run around in circles instead of throw the deep balls. Shit, his most successful pass of all time was to himself. So just throwing that out there.
Was it?
You don't remember when Mariota threw a pass to one of his receivers, but it was so bad, it bounced off the guy's helmet. Mariota caught it and then ran it into the goddamn end zone. Like he couldn't have done that first.
Yeah, but, I mean, I guess one would argue that if somebody sees a pass, then the defense moves back into a defensive stance. And so if you're a quick enough safety, you're going to move back in that moment, and it just happened to bounce off. Maybe he planned it. Maybe there's actually so much skill sitting
Wasn't
behind.
Wasn't it a linebacker?
A linebacker to hit him in the helmet?
It was.
Are you saying his own
linebacker in the face?
And it bounced off? I'm pretty sure Russell Wilson did something similar. Russell Wilson did something similar one time where it was batted out of the air and he caught it, and it was, Wilson to Wilson for like a 5-yard gain or something. But I mean, it's no immaculate reception, but that's neither here nor there. So on that same line of quarterback talk, somebody sitting behind a quarterback, obviously there is that Jordan Love conundrum in Green Bay. They did the same thing with Rodgers. We all know that story. Anyways, the other one that I actually want to talk about more is Jalen Hurts. Sitting behind Carson always gets hurt himself. Wentz. Is that a quarterback that's a good red shirt? Or, I mean, even somebody like Jake Fromm sitting behind, in Buffalo? Jacob Eason in Indy is another quarterback sitting behind a veteran quarterback. I mean, what situation here for a quarterback is a good one to be in?
I'll admit I'm the most interested here in Jalen Hurts sitting behind Carson Wentz. Is an odd situation where you're simultaneously expecting Wentz, who's a relatively young quarterback, to get hurt. You're almost counting on it at this point. It's a yearly fiasco.
Okay.
I think he's an interesting concept as a red shirt simply because if he proves to be at least at Carson Wentz's level,
Mm-hmm.
I don't think Carson Wentz will stay with the Eagles. He's injury prone. He puts up the points. I'll give him that. He's an impressive quarterback, but he's not consistent at all.
Okay.
With Jordan Love and the Packers, it was such an interesting draft from the Packers. I don't want this to turn into a...
By interesting, did you mean terrible?
In my opinion, it seems like every single pick that the Packers made was to piss off Aaron Rodgers.
Yeah, and there's argument going around that obviously the coach wants to say, hey, this is my Green Bay Packers, not the Aaron Rodgers, and that's what some believe Mike McCarthy kind of had a problem with and why he could never achieve that next level was the fact that he was always kind of taking second fiddle to arguably one of the best current quarterbacks in the NFL. But if your coach is one that should be coaching a team, but your quarterback is the one that's taking over and just kind of wants to run the show, I mean, going through a draft and then saying, hey, these are the guys that we're going to pick to better our franchise long run, I mean, can you blame the guy? I'm playing devil's advocate here. I'm not a LaFleur fan, but...
I think that very much so that goes into the argument of, is the coach and the coach's opinion the most important, or does he have to listen to and learn from, mold around his players?
Mm-hmm.
Bill Belichick and Tom Brady was the perfect example, given that Belichick is arguably one of the greatest coaches ever. And Tom Brady, I guess this season we'll see if he is truly the greatest of all time. It's a give and take relationship, and the Packers seem to be done with Aaron Rodgers as an era.
So you're going to say that somebody like Jordan Love is obviously he's the future of Green Bay. It's not a situation like Brett Favre and Aaron Rodgers coming in to sit on the bench for 3 or 4 years. It's something that's sooner than that. Now, I will say that there are rumors, obviously, going around that maybe there's going to be some miraculous trade and Aaron Rodgers goes to the New England Patriots or something crazy like that. I've also seen ones where he goes to the Broncos, and that would make sense because for whatever reason, John Elway as a GM has always been kind of that. He got, obviously, Peyton, the true greatest of all time, to come in and be the only quarterback ever to win a Super Bowl for a second franchise. Only time it's ever happened. Don't think Tom Brady will do that, but that's neither here nor there. He also went out and he got Joe Flacco to do the same thing. Joe Flacco, obviously not a Peyton Manning or even a Tom Brady for that matter in his own right. Probably a little more accurate downfield, but if you get somebody like Aaron Rodgers to step into that situation, it would make sense based on John Elway's history to try to pull something like that off. We're going to switch gears here. We're going to say, where do you think, if Rodgers is done in Green Bay, where's he going to go?
There was a lot that you said there that you didn't give me a chance to refute, talk about, bitch about. Oh God, what's his fucking name? He played for the Rams and the Cardinals, and he won. I'm pretty sure he won a Super Bowl for both.
Who? The Rams and the Cardinals? No, you're thinking.
Yes.
No. You're thinking. Gosh darn it! I see his face. No, he didn't win with the Cardinals. The Steelers actually beat the Cardinals in the Super Bowl. He was the closest.
Did they?
Yeah, they did.
Okay.
They lost to the Steelers.
I was thinking that he won with the Cardinals.
No.
Kurt Warner.
No. Yeah.
Fucking Kurt Warner.
No, Kurt Warner was one of the closest to ever come to getting that second one. There are quarterbacks who have tried, but Peyton Manning is the only quarterback to win a Super Bowl with 2 franchises. It's extremely rare for that to be able to happen, which is why in order for Tom Brady now to prove that he is the greatest of all time and better than a Belichick model quarterback, one would argue that a Bruce Arians, a quarterback whisperer himself, would have to mold the system around him to be able to make him flourish. Now, for a guy that can't hit the side of a barn from about 10 yards out, I don't know that he's going to have much of that option, especially when you have guys like Godwin and Mike Evans who are deep threats, and Tom Brady not being as accurate as he was, 3 years ago. I don't know.
I personally, as a Raiders fan, am not the biggest Tom Brady fan.
But you're a Patriots fan.
I will say that. No. What?
Aren't you a Patriots fan, though?
No. I root for them. I have rooted for the Patriots over the Seahawks because I'm so goddamn tired of 12s. That does not make me a Patriots fan. All right.
Okay.
We have gotten so fucking sidetracked.
Yeah, that's all right. We're in the middle of it here. We're going to go. That's what happens with me. This is real life. This is what happens. We're not analysts, but we're pretending to be better than the paid professionals because that's really what the people want. By the way, I'm going to do a quick shameless plug here. If you have not already done so, please go to youtube.com, search for League of Shadows Fantasy Football, and you can subscribe and become the third subscriber to our YouTube channel. Go ahead and do that. All right, let's get back on track here. Kind of get back into the redshirt aspect of it. Again, Tanner's one of those that he always likes picking that tight end situation. I always personally like going wide receiver, but they're both positions between wide receiver and tight end are the kind that you should probably wait a year or two. There are exceptions when they're going to come in, step into a position, and you're hoping, like Odell Beckham Jr., obviously. Nobody drafted him. He was picked up a couple weeks later after the injury and everything settled down. But at the rookie aspect, you're kind of hoping something like that happens, right? Where they just blow up. Not as likely in wide receiver. I mean, in that position, what do you generally look for if you were going red shirt with that?
Personally, whenever I draft a red shirt, I think I already went on this rant.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you said you go for somebody that's going to potentially start. I'm looking for, are there late round flyers that you think could do that? Not to give away your whole draft strategy here.
I think that there are interesting people at every level. And I mean, the problem is, love him or hate him, Tom Brady was round 6. At the end of the day, arguments aside, he puts up the numbers and he has consistently put up numbers. I'm always looking at these random ass names that I didn't know beforehand.
Mm-hmm.
We all had our draft positions. I assume that most of us were relatively correct in the top 8 or so, because that's what we all talk about. But when we get way down here, random people, round 5, Tyler Johnson. Random name, terrible to see what he does. Mm-hmm. He has a weird team, Buccaneers. He's coming in with Tom Brady and Mike Evans. I don't know. I'm always intrigued. Everybody's like that. I mean, Colin Johnson, same round, wide receiver, Jaguars.
Mm-hmm.
I really, really like Beowulf Minshew. I'm a fan, I'll admit. And I'm intrigued to see him getting young and good talent,
mm-hmm.
given that he did the best that he could with a shit team last year. A lot of the Lions picks I am single-handedly frustrated by, simply given the fact that I'm not going to draft any of them, but I was interested in as players.
Okay.
I assume you have a bit stored somewhere about my hatred of the fucking Lions.
No, I was waiting. I mean, it's always the same thing. Everybody always kind of has those teams that they steer clear of, and I mentioned it in the last podcast a little bit. I generally don't go many people from the Seahawks. I generally don't go many people from the Raiders, both for very different reasons. Raiders are just a terrible team, and you just can't trust which Seahawk is going to be the one that they're going with that week, whether it's injury or whether it's going to be if they manage to throw the ball once every 6 years. But I mean, there are other sides of it where, I mean, if you're looking at, let's say, Minnesota, they just drafted a wide receiver. Steelers drafted a running back, or you did mention even Tyler Johnson. It's one of those where it's like, is he far enough down on the depth chart? Obviously, he's not going to be that Mike Evans big receiver in the end zone going far. Gronk is obviously a little aged, in my opinion. He was kind of injury prone the last season or two at least. But I mean, is there going to be a wide receiver in that respect that can take kind of those short, quick underneath routes, or is there somebody in, say, Pittsburgh that can be that Antonio Brown? I mean, fill that hole, if you will, because somebody like Juju Smith-Schuster kind of takes up those quick slant button hook, just those down inside routes like that.
My issue with the Tampa Bay Buccaneers at this point is that they're a win now team. You're right. Gronk has always been injury prone. Tom Brady is getting old. It's a win now or nothing. What was that?
Getting old? He is old. Okay, so they're a win now team, but what does that mean for a rookie aspect?
From a rookie aspect, I think it's one of the most important aspects of a win now team is having the old, on the way out players mixing with the young up and comers. It's the combination of experience, the quickness of the youth and the knowledge of the old that makes it a formidable and dangerous team. That's why I'm interested in Tampa Bay moving forward.
Okay.
And then you said a bunch of other things that I don't remember now because I was working on that rant.
That's all right. I was going to actually jump over now to somebody you might be able to speak a little more in depth of. I feel like as the fantasy football world continues to evolve and move forward, some of those positions that are a little more, and I can't remember the name of the guy this last year, or the year before, that was listed as a tight end, but actually did a lot of running back. He was a Steeler. I know Tanner had him on his team for a little bit. But looking at the draft and kind of those later rounds, there is Lynn Bowden, who was drafted by the Raiders. He's running back / wide receiver. That's how he's billed now. I'm not sure how Yahoo's going to have it, but something like that is probably, and obviously you're a Raiders fan, you tend to gravitate towards that. Is that something that's going to stand out more in the fact that they can actually plug in more pieces than just a standard tight end or just a standard running back?
Okay. I actually am excited about that guy. I just feel like I try my best not to talk about the Raiders. I have a personal bias, and of course, my excitement for the Raiders supersedes all other excitement. So that's one of the last things that I like to talk about. John Gruden is a coach who likes to fuck with the system. He has his system. He runs it his way. Lynn Bowden switching back and forth between wide receiver and running back is going to be interesting, in my opinion. I think he's going to stack up a lot, much like a Taysom Hill character, where he was listed as the quarterback, but he was doing a lot of wide receiver. And overall, it introduced that guessing element. And I'm very excited for Lynn Bowden, just from that surprise aspect and the what's he gonna do. I mean, thank you, Jake, for calling him out by name in this podcast when I was planning to draft him. But whatever, it's fine. Fuck you.
Well, I mean, he was one of those that just kind of stood out as, like, again, the if you have the option to be able to plug him into two different spots. Taysom Hill is one of those that, while they do have that versatility, I don't feel like they're one that you would put in your everyday roster. And I can't recall, again, there was the name of that tight end. He was listed as a tight end / running back, but he ran as a running back when the Steelers were really hit up with the injuries. Another one, though, in the draft here was Antonio Gibson. He's also listed as a wide receiver / running back, whereas Bowden is running back / wide receiver. But he's over there in Washington. Now, obviously, Dwayne Haskins is a fiasco in and of itself, but I mean, is just the appeal of a dual designation position worth the consideration no matter what team they go to?
I think Taysom Hill was an interesting prospect, and no, he was not an everyday roster. But what he did was introduce the concept of dual position players that I think is going to be the new face of the league moving forward, is these people who will designate themselves wide receiver, running back, tight end, but play more positions. I mean, we all grew up playing football in the backyard for our schools, whatever, and we all swam around in different positions. Some of the best cornerbacks in the league have been people who started as wide receivers.
Yeah, but that,
as much as I hate...
No, go ahead.
As much as I hate Richard Sherman, his start as a wide receiver greatly influenced his ability to make interceptions. And I think that moving forward, we're going to see a lot more dual skill positions because of the versatility and the question mark that they're going to create.
Well, that is something that has been around for a long time. If you look back years ago, obviously before most of us were born, and some of the old fogies that might listen to this might have a better aspiration to be able to answer some of these questions, but that position, there were a lot of guys in the old AFL league where they would literally they'd play offense, then they'd go over and they'd play defense. So you have these weird quarterbacks that would not only have, 100 yards rushing and 50 yards passing over the course of a couple games, but they'd also have, there they are with 4 interceptions, and they also returned the ball. That was something that was a little more common. So what you're saying is you're thinking that maybe it's going to be a little bit more of a resurgence, and it's something that, as the league continues to progress, something that makes yourself a little more valuable.
Exactly. I think in the past, players playing both sides of the ball was an interesting concept, and it showed the versatility of players. And then we had this era in the middle where people hyper-focused on one skill. And I think that moving forward, we're going to see, yes, a resurgence of doing multiple things in kind of the shift for what the league's going to become. That's my opinion, and every time that I make a prediction, I'm wrong. So...
Okay. Well, one might argue
that how you will.
Yeah, one might argue actually that as the quarterback position continues to evolve, the running quarterback is, while I think they have a little bit more of a shelf life than a pocket passer, they are kind of that wave of the future where you're hoping that you can have that dual threat. So from a rookie aspect, if you are looking at that position, I mean, obviously if you can build yourself kind of that niche in whatever team you get drafted for, that would be a great thing to have. But I always feel like one of the problems that we have with red shirts is that we either go so far one way to where they're going to start and I'm going to just designate them as a red shirt because I needed a rookie and here we go, I'm just going to have them. The other side of it is where you're looking at it and you just pick up this rookie because you're hoping for a prospect, but they just sit there the entire year. At the end of the season, you just kind of drop them. There isn't really that in between as much as one would hope for.
You're right that it's not there as much as we hope. Personally, I think one of my biggest issues when it comes to a red shirt is just when to activate them. I mean,
yeah.
There was one year when I had a red shirt who was on my bench putting up points There was one year when I had a red shirt who was putting up an average of 18 a week, and I didn't activate him simply out of a desire to not get that roster hit, and my other wide receivers were okay. Mm-hmm. And I should have activated him much sooner simply to eliminate that personal debate. And that's always been my biggest problem with the red shirt. If you get someone who you want to activate right now, then you activate them as soon as you can. And if you get somebody who you're hoping is going to progress, then you wait too long to activate them. Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, and that absolutely, I know that does happen with several of the teams. I mean, you just don't want to be that guy that activates them too soon. And so there is a lot of sitting and waiting on the bench. I mean, I even did that this last year with my wide receiver from San Francisco. I was hoping all season that he was going to be able, and he was doing okay, but it wasn't the fact that, well, am I really going to actually go out of my way and activate, or am I just going to wait and see what happens for Deebo Samuel, or what do you actually do and at what point? Because, I mean, obviously, when you're looking at fantasy football, the projections are always there and you know what everybody's talking about doing. You see what's happening. But if you get it right in that perfect moment, you look like a genius. But if you get it wrong, you're hoping everybody else gets it wrong too. So then it's just, well, nobody knew. If you're the one that got it wrong, obviously you just got it wrong. But you're hoping that you can be the one that gets it right. And being able to project that at the right time is kind of tough, especially when it comes to those later round picks. Obviously, there are the first rounders that you're like, well, this guy should have some high potential, but a little bit deeper. And since we don't have the luxury of most dynasty or keeper leagues where they kind of have that large roster, being a little more confident in your decisions. I mean, unless you're just throwing at a dartboard like Sean likes to do every year, I feel like a little more confidence is you're just hoping for that guy, and when you pick him, that's what you got.
Right, I agree. And as one who every year sees my red shirt pass me by, and I have to wave out the fucking window as they're going, it's kind of an odd back and forth. Obviously, I'm bad at fantasy football. I always have been, always will be. Not getting over that permanent 9th place. But I don't know what I'm saying. Just like I never know what I'm doing in fantasy football.
Oh, that's funny. No, I know, and in the off season and with these recordings, because there's not much not really sports to talk about at this point in time, I like to always just talk about the what ifs, and I feel like fantasy football is this weird equalizer in that even though you can pick the perfect team and you can score the most points, or you can, whatever happens, you might just be out of the playoffs by a point and then end up in the toilet bowl and then losing overall due to a stat correction in the opposing team's favor. And all of a sudden, you missed out on the playoffs, and actually looking at projections, you probably would have ended up in 3rd or 4th place, but now Cass is obviously sitting at the bottom. Again, in that moment that you're picking up the red shirt, when you're like, okay, it's time to activate, you're hoping you don't get screwed long run because you made that wrong decision. But it is a great equalizer in its own right.
Yeah, you're completely right. I mean, I lucked out this year in the stat corrections, saving me from 10th place for the second time. And I will never be able to overstate how glad I am for stat corrections.
Okay.
But fantasy football is a weird thing. And every year we say, oh, the league's weird this year. I think football as a whole is just weird. And as someone who is always wrong, I will just say, fuck the rest of you for actually getting it right sometimes. Because I don't know what you guys are doing. It doesn't matter how many hours I sit here and stare at my fucking computer. You guys will always just fly by the seat of your pants and make your choices and still do better than me. I can love my team on paper every goddamn year, and I still fucking lose.
I feel like this is a kind of a backhanded slap at Sean, who always seems to, again, have that dart throw of a pick, but for some reason he's always in the playoffs, and you're like, wait a second, how did this just happen? And he's there. Another good example is obviously somebody like Deshaun, where you're just like, it doesn't look good. Arthur was this last year's exception with the team. I mean, it's like, how do you make it to the playoffs or win the regular season, number one team overall, with Chris Carson, I believe, and Leonard Fournette? I mean, it's like, what are you looking at here, and how does that work? That these, I don't know, they must have magical darts. But was there anything else in particular that you wanted to really address or add? I know you mentioned, obviously, smack talk is, it's abysmal in the offseason. There are no sports. There's nothing to really smack talk except for the fact that you just admitted that you suck at fantasy football. I mean, what do you got for me? You want to just say how you're going to do a full 180 and not be a ninth this year, or
when it comes to the trash talk, I will say personally I have been absolutely wanting. The rest of you guys need to step it up several stages. The best trash talker is usually Sean, who's been completely silent at this point. We all still have a group chat. We all still know each other's emails. Why am I not getting death threats at this point for being as bad as I am? More importantly, I think moving forward, going into next year, like you said, I have absolutely admitted I'm bad at fantasy football. I am so goddamn terrible at fantasy football. So what the fuck are the rest of you guys doing when I actually beat you? Specifically, Tanner, how the fuck did you lose to me, of all people? You absolute twaddle shit. How the fuck did you ever fucking lose to me? That's the biggest thing here, is if you're losing to me, you have to be like fucking letting your toddler punch in what you're setting your lineup at every week, because there is no excuse for it at this point. I don't know. I'm Dick Snatcher.
Sounds like you got a new team name there. So
is that your recommendation? That next year's team name is Dick Snatcher?
No. I would probably, I mean, obviously, you said that your team is not very good. You admit to that. I mean, is WOT a thing? They have the greatest of all time, which I should change mine to. But would you change yours to WOT? Worst of all time? Or?
I will. I will literally change my team name this season to WOT. Because I am the WOT. And every fucking time you people lose to me, you will have to look at that you lost to the worst of all fucking time. Just as a constant reminder, why the hell am I beating you?
That's funny. I think most of us are pretty disappointed in ourselves when we do lose to you. But that's neither here nor there. All right. Well, we are looking to wrap this one up, but is there anything else you want to throw out there last minute? Any words of advice, words of encouragement, words of anything for anyone else?
Honestly, this quarantine has taught me a lot of things, and that is that most importantly and above all, I hate all of you, but the least you could do is remind me that you hate me too, so that I have something to do. Jake, you should probably up the podcast numbers because I'm getting bored as shit.
You could do one, produce one yourself and send it out. I'd listen to it, but
no one else would. We went off on so many fucking tangents.
That's all right. That's what happened.
Did we talk about anything that you wanted to?
We hit on some of it. Zach talked about a little bit too. So I mean, most of the stuff, especially in the offseason, it's all conjecture. We'll see how this next season plays out. I mean, there are teams like the Saints that are talking about not meeting until the preseason, and if that's the case, like, do you even want anybody on the Saints? Like, I don't know that you do. I mean, but
no, I agree. That is surprisingly high on my list this year for maybe not just the refusal to do anything. And I mean, there are so many other teams that are proposing these weird concepts. I mean, and of course, on the other hand, you have the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, who are all still meeting each other anyways. And so you have to ask yourself, are you that concerned, or, are you worried that there's going to be a second wave and one of their players is going to go down coughing blood on the fucking field? Like, I don't know. That was a question to you personally, Jake.
Gotcha. No, I don't know that it's. I think the NFL is $1 billion a year industry, so we're going to have a season regardless, whether whether the Saints play or not. Like, yeah.
No, we'll have a season. I'm just curious how the season's going to play out, especially from a fantasy aspect. If you're on that end of the spectrum that's worried that, coronavirus is that big of a deal, are you drafting based on the fact that you think that they might get sick?
I mean, I guess that's an interesting question if you're based on that concern, because obviously there are places like New York, New Jersey, Seattle, New Orleans. There's some LA is another hot spot when it comes to that aspect of it. But, I don't know that I'd actually thought about that too much. Is that something that you're going to take into your draft spec? I mean, there are places like Atlanta that are already opening. So does that mean a Matt Ryan in a dome with potentially no people around him, if they don't play with any NFL fans, are you going to still look to that? Or what are your qualms?
To be perfectly honest, I hadn't thought about any of this until right now when I said it. I think it's an interesting concept. I mean, we're also talking that coronavirus is asymptomatic, right? So does Matt Ryan already have it? He sneezes on the football, throws it, and whoever catches it now gets coronavirus, and they're going to actually have symptoms and go down? It's something that, I don't know. I personally will not be including it in my draft strategy.
Mm-hmm. Or maybe you should, because you got to think let's think about somebody that has a history of cheating. Let's go with Tom Brady here. Maybe he purposefully, knowing that he has a healthier immune system, will inject himself with the corona. And then what he'll do is he's like, I'm going to specifically cough on this ball and throw interceptions to target people. Maybe that's what his goal. I mean, can you weaponize it? Should we be calling China to figure out what's happening? Maybe we need to come up with a way to stop Tom Brady from infecting the Rona before he starts throwing it around.
No, you're absolutely right. Tom Brady is the number one target here. Is there anything on the current agenda for the NFLPA on flags getting thrown for people who might have coronavirus? I'm pretty sure that's pass interference, or at the very least, it's future pass interference.
Well, I mean, it's one of those where it's like, I mean, in all honesty, though, Tom Brady is one of those. They say it affects old people more. Between him and Drew Brees, their combined age of 365, they are the ones that this corona targets the most. Maybe they need to be the most worried. Maybe we should get some kind of, does he have to wear a face mask? Like, what are we thinking about this long run?
I'm thinking that maybe we just we make sure that we step out in front of the potential consequences, and we make sure that Tom Brady, Drew Brees, Aaron Rodgers, and I'm concerned about him moving forward with the future of the league. So Patrick Mahomes should also be all very, very careful and probably just quarantine themselves for the entirety of the season and not play at all for the benefit of the league as a whole, just in case, and for their own safety.
Just in case, for their own safety. All right, fair enough. Well, on that note, we are going to wrap it up here. Appreciate you chatting with me. Look forward to hearing more of this corona analysis as this progresses next time on Thoughts from Quarantine with Eli. And to the rest of you, until next time.
Hey, hey, let's go. 緊化する大切なもの Protect my vows 僕が悪い So let's fighting Let's fighting wow